Make Word Music is happy to welcome a dear friend of mine from St. Louis, Missouri, perhaps the epitome of weird music, if you choose to look at it that
How dare
way.
you say I'm from
Tory
St. Louis?
Z Starbuck. Tory, how you doing?
We all know I'm from the planet Saturn.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Well, that's true. That's true. you just visit St. Louis for, work and whatnot.
Grew up a big part of my life, I guess, because when you think about the age, this is an important age, is when you're 11 years old. I think 11 is an important age because you do start discovering what musics and art and stuff you like and books. And so when I was 11,
Sure.
my father decided to move from a suburb of St. Louis, Hazelwood, Missouri. And then we moved to Warrenton, Missouri, which is about a little over an hour away west of
Yes.
very country setting. And so that was different, moving somebody that was, I was already, on my way into buying rock records, had Iron Butterfly and Three Dog Night and Rod Stewart and the Faces, Edgar Winter's Frankenstein, that kind of stuff. I was already kind of knew what I was interested in by the time I was 10. And the same with books, too. I was into books and the kind of artwork I liked. So kind of Warrenton and then pining to get back to St. Louis, which is why when I got here, I've been pining to get to Arizona.
Fair enough.
Well, because of the landscape and how it makes me feel in the desert and surrounded by, like, modern architecture.
Sure. Right. Well, you and I, prepare to be shocked, we've known each other for right at 25 years now. And if there's
1993, I think it was 1993 when I was working at Streetside Records in St. Louis that you came in with your little snarky comments and stuff, and pretty fun.
Well, see, we matched each other, the snarky comments, and you always had an interesting outfit on, and I think that's how we bonded one day. I walked in and you were wearing a, this was closer to 95 or 96 when I walked into my uniform and you were wearing a lovely zebra print. I don't remember if it was a unitard or what it was, but. I know. It was about then. Trust me. Trust me. But I knew we were friends because I walked in and I saw the outfit and all I said was, formal today. And I just walked right past you. So we've kind of been together ever since then. But you have opened my ears to more sounds than just about anybody that I've been associated with listening to over the years. Give me the Tory Starbuck story.
The term genres, but because of the different styles, we crossed from like your love of David Bowie to your love of Frank Zappa to then I was one of the musicians that when I settled into like playing music with bands, it was like new wave and punk rock, and with me it was more art punk. I liked the art punk. I was influenced by David Bowie, Brian Eno, Roxy Music, and Kraftwerk, that kind of stuff. And that kind of music is what I really got into, but I was one of the rare ones that didn't throw away my Rush albums and my Yes and my Jazz Fusion. I just... I agreed with a lot of the punk ideas that, like, that was very pompous music and, people shouldn't have to like learn to play that kind of music in conservatories to be in a band, but it still didn't. To me, it didn't take any of the interest away. I still thought that Yes, and it was definitely over the top music. You couldn't just form a band playing Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Nectar or something. So that's the thing I loved about punk is that you could just pick up an instrument and go at it. But I like the imagination. I think I like the bands that were maybe, if they didn't have technique, they had the imagination, like Brian Eno, where you had, my favorite bands are the ones where you had some people who could play like Chick Corea and Robert Fripp and Bill Bruford, but then you had your Brian Eno and your Sid Vicious, and it's like, there was this image, and then there was this like technique, and then you had the imagination. It's like, but you know what? What if we took the sound of like, we tossed a couple of shoes in a drawing machine and turned it on and used it for percussion, and I did that stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. You taught me the importance of, for lack of a better phrase, marching to the beat of your own drummer and
Right.
combining styles like that.
Instead of just doing
There
all
was no
noise,
purity
like,
to it.
just like, oh, I hate all music. It should be like this. It's like, well, no, I think noise is really interesting, but yeah, I didn't believe in like throwing out technique and for that matter, throwing out beautiful melodies. Like, you know, when I think about Madman Across the Water up to Blue Moves of Elton John's music career, that was like my favorite. And the chord structures that he wrote. And I like taking those kind of ideas and then enhancing with the coolness of David Bowie, his weird ideas, and then the very lofty
Right.
ideas of Brian Eno, and throwing in all your sort of King Crimson sounds, and then bands like Throbbing Gristle, which is just turning on electronics and improvising. Throbbing Gristle had some stuff that sounded, God, like it could have been off of Bitch's Brew. Some stuff in Miles Davis and Evil
Right.
Live when it's like very atmospheric and ambient. And there's like, you know, he's got the trumpet going through the wah-wah pedal and the synthesizer going. And there's stuff like that sounds like that on Throbbing Gristle. And I heard that before I heard Bitch's Brew, which is really funny. It's funny how I like actually heard certain things
Right.
in the wrong order. Like I got into the music of Bach listening to Walter Carlos. You know, when the album was over, before they were Wendy Carlos, they were Walter Carlos. And that's how I
Right.
got into
Yeah.
listening
I was in the
to
same
Bach.
boat.
Like,
Yep.
these melodies are great, but I heard them first on the Moog. You know, him playing it on the Moog modular synthesizers. And, well, her now. And,
Right.
Man, when she was...
Right.
And you have to think of the amount of work she had to do, because those weren't polyphonic. They were all monophonic, and she had to stack all sorts of sounds together to orchestrate them. And I don't know, I like them. Now, if sometimes there's synthesizer music that doesn't need to be, like, it doesn't add anything to the classical music. It's sort of like, oh, it sounds beautiful the way it is. Like, for instance, Vivaldi's Four Seasons.
Right.
It's like, my favorite season on there, I think, is Summer, which sounds really dark. I always thought it sounded more like it would have been winter, but summer is one of the seasons I like. And I don't know if I could hear it realized on a synthesizer. But when you hear, like, Tomita do, you know, the music of Snowflakes Are Dancing, so it's just really, really neat. Just really,
Right.
because it was all written on piano, and then Tomita realized it on synthesizers, and it just added so much imagination to it. Kind of like his version of Holst Planets,
Right.
which a lot of classical
Yeah. I was going to mention that one because that's the Tomita I heard.
Because I think it's because they like Snowflakes Are Dancing because they're like, that's really imaginative, because what he did out of hearing the piano music is just so different. Where they thought the planets, it was already orchestrated and already had that sort of science fiction-y vibe to it and the build. And I don't think they felt he added anything new to it, but I thought so, especially when they have the countdown, you know, before the rocket lifts off. And you know,
Right.
I thought that was a great album, and I still do. But
It sounds like that
like
require.
you said, there is no good or bad music. There's music, and then there's things that reach us and things that don't touch us. And sometimes they don't touch us at one time, but they will in years later.
Right. There are multi-instrumentalists and there are multi-instrumentalists, and I'm thinking you're in the latter. I've never pegged you as a guitarist or a keyboardist or a vocalist. Saying you have a little bit of everything is a bit of an understatement. So, how do you describe yourself as a musician?
The first instrument that I really played more was guitar, starting on acoustic guitar, and then electric guitar, and then buying pedals, and then that was my sound. A lot of guitarists would watch me play, and they're like you need somebody sitting down at your feet doing that, because you were playing with the pedals as much as you are the fretboard, and that was my sound. But I think
Right.
vocalist definitely Dr. Mabuse that's been in many bands with me, Next Radio, and the Tory Starbuck Project, and just other bands with him. That I'm still a vocalist,
Primarily a bass
that
player.
sings. And not to use that as an insult
Right.
that people don't, but I think that uses different octaves and vibrato and different techniques. Still likes to sing like David Bowie's Heroes album to Rico Kasich to Ben Orr to Gary Newman, which you never think of that as, it's kind of like a
Right.
deadpan robotic voice. But I think most of the vocalists I identified with, whether it was Peter Murphy of Bauhaus or Richard Butler from Psychedelic Furs, it always had like a touch to Bowie. I mean, Richard Butler had this great voice. It's
Right.
like the combination of John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, combined with David Bowie. He's
Right.
got the force and delivery of a very pissed off and kind of sneering Johnny, but there's Bowie's timbre is in there. He sounds like Bowie with laryngitis. Like after many tour, like just singing every night, and if Bowie lost his voice. That's what Richard Butler, he's got that great sounding, that voice. But I like to be able to sing as if I'm like flipping channels. So, going from
Right.
other voices. And then my friend Perry MG, who was in Next Radio with me, that just disturbed him so much that I would say that. He'd say, yeah, but why do you have to always, you're always using other people when you're describing your voice? And what about Tory's voice, the Tory Starbuck voice? And I don't know, I guess to me that is the Tory voice, is all those voices. Like I don't think I've ever sat down and just said, well, I'm going to sing, because then I feel like I'd be trying to sing like in a talking voice, almost. So there's always
Right.
been I've always gone to something. There's a catalog that opens up when I think of what am I going to use my David Sylvian voice, or am I, it comes up. And it may not even be that it really sounds like those people, but in my head, I'm thinking this is how they go about getting that sound, whether they sing from the diaphragm or in their esophagus, or if it's up like, let the good times roll, or it's, I don't mind you come, from down there, that razor range of Ben Orr.
Right.
I don't know. Where I guess when I pick up guitar or other instruments, that catalog doesn't open up as much. Like I don't try and mimic anything like when I sit down at the synthesizer. Like I might try and play someone's song, but I think when I pick up instruments, I just start playing more. There's less thought that goes into it than when I sing.
Well, your voice, be it vocal or instrumental, has gone into a lot of projects over the years. Off the top of your head, how many albums do you think you've recorded?
We've counted and combining, and also albums of other bands I've been on, and going from vinyl to cassette tapes to CD, really close to 200.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There was a period there where it seemed like you were doing 2 or 3 of them a year.
I was doing, for a while, I was doing 5 albums a year. And those are
That's
the years
prolific.
where I was recording a lot of improvisation. Like I would invite you over, and I would invite T. David Norton over, and Tom Sutter, and then Venus would be there. So Venus and I would just turn on our equipment, and there wouldn't really be any discussion about what we would do. You would have your guitar and your effects, and June, Sukatani would be there with his bass, and we would just turn stuff on, and sometimes we didn't even know what instrument we were going to be playing. Somebody just did a sound, and that was the beginning of it. And then we would just kind of move around the studio and go to various synthesizers. I have a lot of Asian double reed instruments, like the Sona, which is a Chinese instrument, and a Zurna, which is Turkish and Arabic. Just all these things we would pick up, and percussion. And then when everyone would go home, I would listen to it, and instead of releasing an album in the form like that, like half hour of that, decided maybe people, because I know a lot of people have trouble listening to improvisational music because they don't hear it as music. They don't get it. It's sort of a story. It's a language of people speaking to each other through instruments.
It's not just spelled out beforehand. It just goes where it goes.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's really bad. But sometimes it's really good to other people. And sometimes you're hearing it, it's like, yeah, I could do better. But there's somebody that's listening to it that they really like it. And I kind of felt, what if this music was put into like pop song length format? So what I would do is I would start, mixing it down, and I would either, toss a coin and like to determine how long it was going to be, or I would just have a stopwatch going, or I would just listen, and I'd be like, listen to something, and then I'd hear a lot of the instruments kind of fading out, but I knew that somebody was going to blast it with something, so I'd try and fade it out before that happened, and that was song one. And it might be like 3 minutes and 25 seconds, but that would be it. And then the next one. And then I put it together in a different order. So song 2 doesn't follow song 1. But I would take all those and shuffle them around so it really sounded like they were recorded on different days.
Sure.
Or different times. And then the cool thing about that is you can put, if you have it on CD, you can hit shuffle, random, and then the album it changes each time you hear it. Which is really fun when I do albums with minute-long pieces. Because you hit shuffle, and you got a new composition each time you hear it. Which is my idea. I got that from The Residents. Had an album. And it was The Residents commercial album. And each song was a minute long. It wasn't longer than a minute long. And they even said, pop music is basically a minute-long song that's repeated 3 times with maybe a bridge or a solo in it. They said, if you'd like to hear it like this, just take song 1 and then just program it 3 times, and there's
your song.
But I kind of like the idea of the random thing, of like making these really short snippet compositions and then hitting random. So each time you hear it, it's a new album. If you want it to be like that,
right? We were talking beforehand
too. I like long-winded pieces like "Awakened" by Yes. Going for the one album. I love stuff like that as well, but it's got to be good.
Right. I remember feeling both terrified and exhilarated by just doing improv, sitting on your floor and just diddling with my guitar through my instruments. And I was the one always saying, "Oh, I don't like that. Let's do it again." And you just wouldn't do it. No, that's good. That's good.
Because, see, there's an age where we start worrying about that. We were talking about that because, my son, Eno, is 9 now, and we're watching how he and his friends play, how they change, like when they play on the playground, when they have a diagram with each other, and there's an age where you start getting a little bit more self-conscious about how you play. It's like it becomes less imaginative and more competitive, and that's kind of a shame. It happens with musicians too, when everyone wants to have a certain sound and they don't want to make any mistakes. And there's a good time to think of the studio as a playground, and just play with the instruments. It doesn't even have to be melodic, or the melody can come in, but it's a really good workshop.
Yeah.
And I like recording it and putting it out there.
Nice.
Like
Funny.
My music.
Funny you should say playground, because you're sitting in your studio right now, which you call what again?
This is the Psychic Cactus Studio.
Okay. For me, it's a playground. It's a toy store. Can you walk us around a little bit, just so people can see what's going on in there?
Hold on a second. Let me hit another light really fast.
Okay. Because what we're seeing in the background right now just doesn't even scratch the surface once we look at the entire room.
So, let's see. So there's the Diageo.
Right. Now this is kind of in the theremin family, but different, right?
So there's only one of these built. It was built by Dr. Mabuse, and it's built out of a chocolate box that used to have chocolates in it. And he didn't want to throw it away when he finished. He said it was such a nice, a handsome box. So he decided to fill it up with electronics.
Oh goodness, yeah.
He likes the solder.
Right.
And then it's got synthesizer in it. It's got an FM radio in it, and it's got a theremin. And you can use there's a mixing volume for each one, so you can have just the theremin or just the radio. So I have a few things. I have the theremin down right now, and you still play it like a theremin.
Right.
Or you turn the other ones down, and then use the theremin.
Very nice. Very sci-fi.
That's the sound of it's an octave cat synthesizer.
Okay.
We have you can't see it, but over here I've got a Roland JP8000.
Right.
And of course, there's the wonderful Kabasa.
Right, so always important. Tons of percussion. Take us to the other side of the room there, real quick. To your right. Like I said, there's just stuff everywhere. I mean, most people have a few guitars sitting around, a couple of amps. This is just a stunning array of stuff. How long has it taken you to assemble this stuff?
Well, I mean, I guess when I started really buying things around 1982.
Wow.
I would say probably from 1982 is when I started purchasing things, and then I don't give much away or sell. I've given my brother Eric a few things, a couple of guitars and some amplifiers, but pretty much I still use everything. I don't keep anything in a box, or I don't collect things and then put them in a display case. I hate that. People that go and buy really hard to find ARP and Moog synthesizers, and then they put them in a display case, so that'll never be heard.
Yeah,
again.
What's the point?
I mean, no, if it didn't work, if they just wanted it for the looks and stuff, I could get it. But no, I mean, if it works and they're not going to use it, that's just a big waste.
That makes sense. I mean, I've never known you, as you said, I've never known you to trade anything in. It goes down there and it stays there until it's ready to be used.
Yeah, I mean, I put things on hold for years. I'll put things away because I feel that maybe I used it on 4 albums in a row, and so I'll put a synthesizer, on the stand back there and pull out another one. And the same with guitars. And for tunings, for that matter, sometimes I use different tunings. And I'll do that. I love using the Robert Fripp tuning, and I like using open tunings that are Turkish Saz. Until I bought a Saz, and then it's well, I don't need to do that anymore.
Right. Yeah, it does.
I've always tried mimicking other instruments until I buy them. Now I own a Japanese koto, and it used to be I would try and I'd play guitar like a Japanese koto, and so this would be kind of like a Japanese koto sound, but it's going through a electroharmonics microsynth.
Now, there's something I didn't think I was going to hear today. that makes sense. And there's for lack of a better word, a legitimate koto behind you, if memory serves. Can we see it?
Can you see it? Let's see.
Yep, there it is. just to the right of the conga there. So there's pretty much some of everything down there. And you were showing me some of the other percussion instruments you had that were really cool.
Yeah, I just recently purchased some temple blocks.
Yep, we're right there in the center. Perfect. Very nice. Very nice. What would you say motivates you to look for a particular sound? Are your songs driven by sound, or is the sound driven by the song?
Both. With me, it's with me, I do things. I don't have like one formula. So sometimes I'll have the music written, and then I just look around and decide to like Joya tubes, or the koto, or a sitar, or something. Or sometimes it happens while I'm recording. I record when I'm composing. I record that during the day, but then usually later at night, when like Venus and Eno are asleep, my wife Venus, if they're asleep, I'll come down and start doing like headphone things so I don't wake them up. So I'll grab, like I have a really nice string machine. It's an Elka string Rhapsody, and it really close to the ARP string ensemble, because I've always loved that sound. So I'll take the Elka string machine and run it through a phase shifter. It's that nice phase sound, and I'll add it to, if I just recorded something with a bass or a guitar. And each instrument I compose totally different. If I'm going to come up with the drum, I call the drum parts first, I'll come up with a click track, or I'll use a sequencer, with something like the Korg Volca. I use that, which is a really neat modular synthesizer. And I'll like build some scenarios of sequences with that, and then I'll play. I've got a cat pads, these electronic cat pads that I play, and I'll come up with the groove, and then I'll either pick up a guitar or bass and come up with something like that. So bass, it'll be more funk jazz influenced, if that's what I picked up first. The guitar could be any mood or feel with it. I feel like I have a lot of, even though I'm not like I don't think people would stick Tory Starbuck as like, oh, he's a guitarist, but I have more moods and sounds on the guitar. I think I'm more versatile. I'm not a shredder. I'd love to be able to play fast, but I can do all the like slow sustain type stuff that Robert Fripp does, and I'm very influenced by that. I like to use a lot of that ethereal guitar stuff he uses, especially with like pitch shifting and stuff where you get the harmonies, and I like that. But again, it really depends on what instrument. I like writing music on an acoustic piano. I don't have one, but when I'm at Washington University playing for dance classes, usually I'll show up early, or I'll stay later and write a lot of music on it. And I'll record. I bring my Zoom handheld tape or recorder with me and record. The problem with that is I can only record ambient stuff because I don't have a click track. So if I wrote something, I'd have to make sure that it's like I was in perfect rhythm when I played it, so that any percussion and other instruments I add to it
makes sense
are going to stay in sync. So yeah, it would be kind of neat if it had two tracks, because I could put a click track on it and listen to that like in my one ear while I'm like composing with the piano. Sometimes I'm just start with a sound. Like I'll go out. I went out this summer and recorded the sound of cicadas and locusts, and then use that as a soundscape to
so sound is everywhere, and music is in everything, as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, sometimes I'll write something melodic, and then I'll be worried, like, is that too normal? Which is funny because no, it's not. Because it's me. But like I think sometimes like, that's too normal, and so I'll have to I got to throw this in, or this sound, or I'll go fill up some saucers and glasses with water, and either bow them with a cello or violin bow, or tink them and change the pitch. And it doesn't always have to be like to add my weirdness to it, because after all, I got interested with what started with men doing bird calls, is making things different. And no, there's just plenty of things you can do with acoustic instruments. So, God, I mean, the German industrial band Einches and Neubaden, the stuff that they've done with jackhammers and acoustic.
So there are no limits as far as you're concerned. You're not just going to.
I don't want to sound that open-minded, because my closed-mindedness comes from growing up in Warrenton, and when I hear a sound, I immediately identify it with racism and stuff. So, and I think people would say that that's my closed-mindedness. Like, I don't like the sound of banjos, don't like harmonicas, I like fiddles. I play the violin. I think when I hear a good banjo player and a good fiddle player, I'm like, that's really
Right.
good. I just don't like the timbre. And when I hear country music, I immediately it takes me back to like getting the crap kicked out of me at like one of the Warrenton fairs or something, or having, we had a lot of country musicians that would stop by there, and bluegrass musicians, and just to hear the words they would call
Right.
certain people because of their races or because of the way they looked. I was just like, I do not like it. So that kind of so I do have to admit that
I was going to go with there were certain musical triggers, but but it depends on how you want to look at it. Now you hit on it just a second ago, right?
A lot of that being playful with that too, but I get
understand.
Let's say that.
Savor the irony, but
so it's like
you hit on it a little while ago, and I'm going to go back to it because the first time you called me and said that you were going to start doing dance music, that was just something that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then you explained what you meant, and that's what you're working on now. That's the first thing that popped into my head.
I meant like club music. Well, and I've always wanted to put out like a club. But I know it's a different topic, but we'll go back to that later. But I'd love to put together like an interesting club thing where it's just not this monotonous thing happening. Like the beat, I know they need the beat and sort of a bass thing, but yeah, it could, oh man, so many soundscapes could be going through there. Almost like what Orb and Future Sounds of London did back in the 90s during the whole rave scene. But no, the music for dance that I do was in the year 2006, I was approached by Dawn Karlovsky, a choreographer and dancer and also she teaches the Alexander technique, which is an important thing.
It
might
probably
help you a lot. Because it's all about how we stand and sit and how we move. Helps us so that we're not putting our
we might have to talk about that later.
And nerves under a lot of stress. I think that dancers like Dawn and David Marchant, who I also play music for his classes at Washington University, he's also teaches the Alexander technique, and they kind of came into it because they were hurting themselves, dancing and just putting their hours of stress on them, and they started. I don't know how I'm sure they got into it in different ways, but it's really interesting, and it does tie a lot into their dance. And I could write music for the Alexander technique. It's almost, to me, it sort of works the same way as Tai Chi does. And Tai Chi is all about fluid motion, and it's all done slow because it's better for your muscles to work out slow, and you get stronger. Because Tai Chi is also a fighting method, so as you learn it slow, if you had to use it fighting, you use it very fast. This all ties in with the dance. And when I met Dawn and saw her dance, she's a modern dancer. It's modern dance, where they use anything from ballet technique to jazz technique to hip hop. I mean, anything. It could be. It's there. As Adrian Blue says, the world is my oyster. It's like, well, the world is their oyster, and they can use and not use whatever they want for it. And so she said, here's my movement. I would like you to, write some music for it. And I had to kind of guess what instruments I was going to use. I had no idea. And so I used something that was for techno music. It was one of the Korg Electribe things, which is used for techno music. Only I didn't use it with the drum machine. I just used it for its kind of built-in synthesizer sequences, but I slowed them down. So they were very... That kind of stuff. And then I played electric violin. I played my violin with it. And I had my guitar and some effects. So I just kind of had to watch her movements and her dancers and decide what the mood was going to be. And then I would bring some things, and sometimes they wouldn't work. I'd bring them for a couple rehearsals. We would rehearse at Washington University, and Dawn's not one of those that just says, write something for me, and Tory, that's nice. No, she's got plenty of her ideas, and she'll let me know if Yeah, no, that's not what I don't really want that. And then we'll talk about like things like Dawn would want the sound of water, and so and it's funny because I used to experiment with water in trash cans when I was in 8th grade. I had one of those Sears tape recorders, and I would go outside to tape the sound of the wind playing the wind chimes outside, and then I would take a metal trash can and fill it with water and tip the trash can and kind of like ping it with my finger because I knew it would change the pitch. And I don't know why I was doing this. I think I already had. It's like I already had the ideas of compositions before I had the music written for it. Like I already had the atmospheres, and a lot of those atmospheres came from listening to Rush's "Farewell to Kings" album because it was songs like Xanadu and Cygnus X1 that, God, those long intros with the tempo blocks and the gongs and the orchestra bells and the Moog Taurus pedals that Geddy Lee was playing. It's like all that stuff. I liked how they would build the song up before it even started. And I think it's sort of like, well, you haven't really had the song yet, but I have thought of these ideas. And yeah, I was really good at coming up with that. So I would kind of visit that 7th grade Tory in my head and use it with Dawn. We would like fill up these metal trash can containers with water, and we would drop marbles into it and move them around. And so we would tape that and the sound of ripping paper close to a microphone. And then as I mix it down, you can pan it from the left to the right speaker, which is really cool on a big theater sound system when you go across. And then I would compose music. And so when I would do a busy soundscape like that with water and ripping paper, the Japanese koto was perfect for it because it just has this nice tranquil. It's like a Japanese harp for anybody that's never heard one. And if you YouTube Japanese koto, make sure you YouTube somebody that can play it. It's usually a Japanese musician. And after watching that, that's when
not so much a player, just
Japanese koto owner, because I don't play. No, I can play and I can play. It was as good as David Bowie played on the album Heroes when he plays Moss Garden, and that's what I was trying for. And Brian May of Queen used what he called a toy koto. I'm guessing it was like a touristy Japanese koto that he used in Prophet Song on Night at the Opera on side 2, or after Seaside Rendezvous. I think you go into Prophet Song, and it's like it's in there, kind of like in the area before Love of My Life and Prophet Song. Just loved the sound of that. And then I started hearing Japanese music, traditional Japanese music with koto, and I love that sound. And and these instruments I play, I realize I'm never going to be considered a traditional sitar player, because koto player, any of that, because a lot of those people, they're not allowed to learn other instruments. Where I talked to Imran Khan about that. Imran Khan was from India. He taught sitar at Washington University. And one of the main things he talked about was you have to give everything to the sitar. Right? It was kind of like, you pick that instrument to master. You don't play this and this and this and this. And I was trying to explain to him that I'm just trying to make rock music more interesting to me. It's like, because I've never considered when I play rock and roll. It's in a format, it'll be rock when you go to a record store. But it's pretentious rock. It's artsy. It's very, it's science fiction, surreal rock. I don't know what else to call it.
There's no serial monogamy towards an instrument or a style for you.
I don't know. Yeah, and to me, I don't know, it's hard for people to think when you think rock. It's like, yeah, but I have all these ambient albums. And I have soundscape. I have stuff that's, borderline jazz and jazz fusion. And when I say jazz, I don't mean like bebop. I mean like Alice Coltrane type jazz. I mean Pharoah Sanders, where you're combining sitar.
The avant-garde type movement there.
With real African.
The avant-garde type movement is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I really liked it. And then right into the fusion, which I guess a lot of people don't even consider that jazz, but I liked it. I liked Return to Forever a whole lot, and I liked things about Moth Edition Orchestra. I love the first 4 albums by Weather Report. Oh man, I just really like the moods that evoked, and that's the kind of music when I wake up in the morning. I can't just put on a rock record, like I used to. Like I don't just like I'm going to listen to the Cars or Killing Joke, or let's put on some Skinny Puppy or something. It's like I like to start off with something like Steve Roach. That's ambient. He's an electronic ambient musician from Tucson, Arizona. Man, you should look him up sometime. He's got studios within studios in his building. He's got all of his old analog synthesizers and then digital synthesizers. Like, my lord, it's got a lot of rooms. And so he's got a lot of neat music that they used to play on when John DiLiberto had.
I remember that. Yeah.
That used to be played on the jazz station from Illinois, WSIE. And at 9 o'clock at night, they would have, you'll listen to John DiLiberto. We'll be hearing the music of St. Louis native Carl Weingarten on guitar. And then some Brian Eno. And, he would like play a lot of really cool stuff. And sometimes he'd dip out of that music and he'd grab something like Cocteau Twins or something the Cocteau Twins did with Harold Budd. And it was just neat to hear. Even Kate Bush, when she came out with an album, she hadn't done music for years.
Right.
She released this double album, and a lot of it was about her son. The music, and I remember he played some of that. Well, and Ravi Shankar's daughter, Anushka Shankar, not only is she an awesome sitarist, but she also understands Western music scale and combines the two and plays synthesizer as well. And he would play some of her stuff, and that's how I got turned on to Anushka.
I'm kind of laughing, right? I'm kind of laughing to myself because I remember those WSIE days, and especially around the mid '80s, and at 9 o'clock when they would switch to more of a new age type format, because that's where I learned about like Andreas Mollenweider, the harp player, and I ran out and bought those records, and
yeah. Sometimes they get a little bit.
Yeah, safe, the safe move was always Yanni. Yanni always seemed to be
that's all part of that. I was like, I wish you would have.
Where were you when we needed that? somebody called the marketing people for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Right.
I have lots of dumb ideas for music, and they're probably the ones that would make me money instead of the stuff I do. Because I'm always either ahead or behind. Like, when I was in Next Radio, we actually got videos on MTV. We put out videos for if you remember MTV's Buzz Clips. So musicians could submit videos, and you could vote on the telephone, yes or no. And if it was yes, they would play more of your videos. Grunge happened. And then everything we were for, the whole very David Bowie science fiction, I was like totally not interested in recreational drugs.
The soundscape completely changed.
And all of a sudden grunge came, and it was against all of that. Anti-science fiction, anti-synthesizer, and it was like, oh my god, it's I don't know. To me, it just looked like Led Zeppelin if they'd like really stopped bathing and just tumbled out of a machine somewhere.
Right. I don't know if
their instrument. I don't know. It's just,
but that's what it was.
The scene for those people. The grunge scene for those people is what it was for me, because there were probably a lot of progressive rock people that wanted to hear more Happy the Man and Gentle the Giant and National Health, and all of a sudden here come these bands that sound like they're recording in a garage somewhere and like using 3 chords, the guitar's not even tuned, and they're yelling, and to them they're like, what the hell? And I don't know, every once in a while the music scene just needs to get a kick, and I guess that's what happened. And it was just in the middle of my time. It was just sort of like, okay, well,
exactly. 25 plus years I've known you, and I don't even know if I've ever said this to you, but I've always admired the fact that you went where the muse took you. You didn't worry about fashion or style or anything else. You just did what you did.
Oh, yeah. And I find new, like, I want to say that when I hear something that comes out that's, here in the now, I don't ignore it, but I'm really surprised. Like, oh, this is great. I like this. Like during the whole grunge scene, I have to remember to also bands like The Pulp came out in Suede and Stereolab, and that's when Blacklight Syndrome released their album. And when Mick Karn, did all that music, and oh man, there was just so much cool stuff that was happening, and music from other countries coming out. From Middle East and India, there was a lot of neat stuff that was coming out, and it just wasn't popular, And I probably wouldn't have known about it had I not worked at a record store. I started buying things by Talib Azkin, who is a Turkish saz player, and he lives in France, and that's why I wanted to buy a saz. I started buying these CDs and learning about instruments, and then my wife Venus and I started getting a Lark in the Morning catalog, and it'd be like, let's get a bunch of these percussion instruments, a couple of these woodwind instruments, and then I want to buy a saz. And then and I would just teach myself how to play them. In the same way that the person that invented the saz, people always told me I couldn't play violin unless I studied at a conservatory. And it's like, well, the person that invented the violin didn't do that. I mean, the people who invented these instruments taught themselves how to play. And I'm sure the reality is the violin wasn't just created in that one instrument. It came out of different ones. Just like, you see the African string instruments, and then out of it came, various string instruments. But they didn't learn it anywhere. I mean, they were all coming up with their own. I think the way that
they just figured it out,
coming up with techniques and building their guitars out of cigar boxes and whatever they found. So there's a bit of that in me. I like some of that. And that's something I kind of like about Tom Waits. A lot of people don't realize Tom Waits really likes noise stuff. And he builds instruments, and he collects weird noise instruments. Weird sirens, those things you crank up. And I remember that finding a book about his interest. In
we should take just a second, because I'll get in trouble otherwise. We should be eternally grateful to your wife, to Venus, because there are plenty of spouses that could not grasp what's going on in your studio and the amount of gear you have there.
Oh, yeah. Well, for one thing, when Venus and I started dating in 1985, she was a visual artist. She painted, she was a photographer, she was interested in doing movies, video, acting, sculpting. She took porcelain classes. When she came over to my apartment and she saw some of the analog synthesizers, like I had the ARP Axe synthesizer hooked up, the Moog MG1, and I was kind of explaining to her that these were synthesizers that did not have sounds in them. They were nothing like samplers. They weren't like your digital synthesizers that have like nice bass sounds and string sounds and stuff. But this was actually harnessing the sound of the electricity that was sent to us by Quiver River here, in Missouri. And like, you're taking electricity and you're turning it into a sine wave or a square wave or a sawtooth wave. That was actually the sound of electricity, and you're creating it. This is like
that makes sense.
Instrument. The electric guitar is not an electronic instrument. It is a piece of wood with microphones on it. I mean, that's what it's not getting its sound out of electronics, and you know what I mean. It's just got a microphone. It's a neat instrument. I like it, but the thing with synthesizers is like, and I never was interested in like trying to mimic like a saxophone or this or that. It's like, I like the sounds that didn't sound like instrument. I like the sounds that sounded like just insects freaking out, or our idea of flying saucers. And that's the whole thing about science fiction in the future. When I told people that I wanted to make futuristic music, and then Dr. Mabuse told me, Dr. Mabuse is full of knowledge that just like really, I don't know, burst my balloon. But it was so real. He would say, but Tory, like, why are you so into the future? Like, what? And he goes, the future is just, it's tomorrow, or it's what's happening in 20 years. He said, and nobody knows what's going to happen. Like anything, we might not have electricity anymore. And that's going to really change the sound of your futuristic music. And he was right, but when I was using the terms future in science fiction, it was from our movie. It's from the movie directors and producers that found the cool fashion of like Gary Newman's outfits and the multicolored spiky hairstyles and the synthesizer sounding effects for that. But he was right, because we're in the future now. From that period, he told me that in 1990. We're here in 2021, and nobody but me is walking around wearing any of those clothing, or playing that kind of music. I mean, there's some. The weird thing is, the electronic music these days is hip hop, electronic pop music. It doesn't sound futuristic to me. I don't know. It's weird, but that was one thing he was right about. Another thing he was right about was after he said, "Tory, why do you run your vocals and your guitar and your drum machine through flangers and phase shifters? It all like cancels each other out." He goes, "It would work better if you had like a lot of straight sounding instruments and then like one with a phase shifter and one with a flanger, because then they stand out." And I said, "Well, yeah, but this is the sound of outer space." And Dr. Magoo stood behind me.
He's right. Doc has a gift for grounding things. I only talked to him a few times over the years, but yeah, he's very, very grounded. Last question.
And Doc has got his love for all the electronic weirdness that he builds, but he's a great blues guitarist. He loves blues. He can play the banjo. I remember the first time I went over to his house to see his electronic studio, and as he showed me synthesizers, I couldn't help but look down at this table, and there were all these boxes. Triggered. Boxes. What are those? He goes, "Oh, that's my harmonica collection." I'm like, "Woo!" He loves Doc, like he told me, he doesn't have the political thing that I have with music. There's a political thing within me. Doc said, to him, it's all colors. He's like, to me, everything is a color. He goes, I can pick these up and insert it in this science fiction music, and all of a sudden the harmonica is a science fiction instrument. Like, you want to bet?
Right.
He's able
awesome.
Realistically, without my goofiness, he's right. And it's something that Frank Zappa said. There's no scientific proof that any instrument or any type of music can cause you to do anything, whether it's violent. I mean, you can say things and give people ideas, but there's no sound that can scientifically make you do something bad.
And that's logical.
Harmonica cannot make.
That would be between you and your therapist, ultimately. One last question, and I've never asked you this before. In a quarter of a century, I have never asked you this. You are sitting in your studio right now. Invite 3 to 5 of your all-time favorite musicians down there to make a record with you, living or dead. Who? Right.
Oh, that's easy, because it wouldn't even be like my favorite that I listen to, because in the reality I could see that. It's sort of like you try and think of like, oh, I wonder why David Bowie and Prince never did an album together. Like,
yeah, would have been.
That's mine. No, I came up with that first. Yeah, that would have been a neat album. But anyway, okay, seriously.
Okay.
Anushka Shankar, for one, because I like her energy and I would really like the sound of her sitar. There's this, I don't know her name, but she's a Chinese drummer, and there's videos of her all over YouTube. She can play anything from metal to progressive rock. I love her drum style a whole lot. But I mean, for that case, I could use someone I know the name of, and I would like Terry Bozzio to come over, and because he doesn't just play one style, and also he can play those. He plays a lot of tuned porcelain things as well. I like a style like that. So I'd say Anushka Shankar. So there's my string sound. Terry Bozzio, and I think John Fox, actually, who is the original vocalist. He was from Wales. He was the original vocalist with Ultravox. But what I liked was when he went and started doing his first solo albums. They sounded a lot. It's weird because Gary Newman was really influenced by Ultravox when John Foxx was in it, and then John Foxx went solo, and his music was influenced by Gary Newman. It sounded very much like what Gary Newman was doing solo, and then Mid-Jur moved into Ultravox and became the vocalist, guitarist, and keyboardist synthesist. John Foxx, the stuff that he did with synthesizers, I really liked. It's he didn't even have like a good keyboard technique, but I like his choice of notes, and I like the sounds he comes up with. And he's back in the music. Well, I don't know if he ever left, but I just noticed he's doing stuff again. He's doing some instrumental music. But those are three people that I would like. Yeah, or it'd have to be somebody that's like a jazz.
The dueling Bowie.
Like Lester Bowie.
Yeah, we call it dueling Bowies for crying out loud.
His body might as well pull up David too. So.
Well,
and then it's no longer my album, is it? It's sort of like I'm getting the coffee for him and stuff. I don't know, but I do know that I'd want someone like Anushka Shankar. I would like a percussionist like Bozio, and it seems like maybe somebody that plays actually. Maybe a host of instruments that has a lot of imagination. Oh, no, I just thought of someone else, too. Man, Annie Clark would be so fun. Yeah, because she just has really good ideas, too. And she's kind of has a good pop sense. Because I know she can think outside of the box, but it seems that lately she's kind of like, it's kind of geared towards dance music. It's interesting. You know, if I was dancing at a club, I like her.
It'd be a hell of a record. And speaking of records, your music is out there. How can people get access to your music?
Tell me there. Play the guitar right. Oh, yeah. So I just released a new album, and it's called The Invisible People. And it has Leon Lamont. He's a percussionist, drummer. He's also a DJ and plays synthesizers. At least on my album, he's playing synthesizer in electronic and acoustic percussion. Then we had Derek Shakir, who was from New York in the 60s, big part of the jazz scene, moved to St. Louis and had a wonderful avant-garde jazz program on KDHX in the 90s. And it was called Jazz Mecca. Derek Shakir is Muslim, and he started getting a lot of trouble from people that were supporting the president. And I think he had his mosque destroyed and his family threatened, so he moved. I don't know where he is. And then we have Eric Armbruster from the band Cave of Swords, played synthesizers on it. And then Chuck Nowakowski, who plays bass and a host of other instruments, played the Korg Chaosillator and bass on this album. So really, I was recording two albums at once. I had Eric and Chuck and myself on one album, and then I was recording another album with Leon Lamont and Derek Shakir, and it was kind of more funk jazz. Derek Shakir plays the bass clarinet. There's really deep tones in it. Well, the albums, they never got finished because, they left. They went on and did other things, and I couldn't find them anymore. So I decided to take I had 30 minutes of each album, so I decided to make one album out of it. And I asked Venus. Venus helped me a lot with not only just the album art packaging and the soundscapes and stuff in my music, but with ideas when I'm mixing about like where to put volume on stuff. And I asked her about this album. I said, well, should I do it like a side A, side B, kind of like, the one group and then the other group? And she said, no, I would pay attention to it more as songs. And it worked a lot better than like having Derek Shakir and Leon Lamont on the first 30 minutes and then finishing it with Eric and Chuck. It worked better listening to it as like just the music and putting them together like I usually do. And it got a lot better than like that. I'd gotten the idea from a lot of, remember the jazz albums from the 50s and 60s, where you had like Mac Roach, and like you'd have two drummers and two bass players, and they'd have it mixed in the left speaker and right speaker, or you'd have musicians, and they would use on one side of the album one group,
Makes
and
sense.
flip it, and
hey, we can
group. But I don't know.
We can find that on us.
It's just by composition, and just kind of pretend that there were not different musicians on it. It works nice that way. So there's the those are now selling if you live in St. Louis, they're selling at Planet Score Records in Maplewood, at Vintage Vinyl in the University Loop, and I just brought some to Euclid Records in Webster Groves. And then they're up on, I have a pimp, is DistroKid, and DistroKid puts my music up on iTunes, Spotify,
Gotcha.
Deezer. I'm up on YouTube. You can hear the stuff on YouTube. I have, I think, 5 or 6 different albums and then a whole lot of singles. Because when I first joined DistroKid, I released an album of mine. It was a retrospective and called it Inventory Starbuck. So it was like my hits off a particular album, songs that were being played on some of the local radio stations and college stations, and had them put on 2 different CDs. But I couldn't upload it to DistroKid because there were 3 cover songs, and then I had to go about putting them up differently. So they are up there, but what I did is you have to fill something out and make sure that you have rights to it. And then when people listen to it, stream it, or buy it, then money goes.
I gotcha.
Proceeds. Because I'll look at like how much money I've made, and I'll go the next day and like, wait, I lost $5, and it's because somebody's listening to those covers. So that's how they do that. So anyway, that's why that album went up as singles instead of me releasing as the album. Then after that, I put up albums. But
nice,
yeah, you can
nice.
buy the albums like that.
Goes into Eno's college fund.
And that way I can make a. Let's see, I found that for 55 plays of a song, I make 10 cents. But I was reading on Facebook. I have friends that were talking about how Bandcamp is the way to go if you're a musician like me, and that musicians like me that are putting their music up on iTunes and Spotify must think that they're going to make it big, like, you know, Led Zeppelin or Lady Gaga.
Right.
No, it's because that's what it was available for. When I looked into Bandcamp, I didn't have a way to put it up there because they asked for like a certain type of files, and I couldn't do it that way. And but then by the time someone invited me to try DistroKid, then the Randy Beeman, who masters my music, and it's also in the band Ice Violet with me, he started giving me WAV files.
We'll figure it out. This, my friend, has been a joy. I'm going to let you get back to your life there. I appreciate you taking the time. We're going to have to do this again sometime.
Yeah.
But he has one more thing to show. These are the bonus clips here, ladies and gentlemen, that we're about to get here.
Oh, but I have one more thing.
Whoa.
This is a Vietnamese instrument, and there's bigger versions of it, but this is really... So you actually play it by setting it down and toggling these things with your hand, and they're really cool. But the new wave band Japan with David Sylvian in it, he's worked with Robert Fripp. The band where they recorded, they had a giant version of this, and for the life of me, there's a song, an instrumental of theirs called Canton, Canton. That's China. Canton. And I could never figure out what the instrument was they were playing. It sounded like somebody filled their mouth up.
That's cool. That's cool. I am going to unleash you onto the world. You go back and do what you do. I do appreciate you taking the time.
That totally makes sense.
And look him up, people. Tory Z Starbuck. You can find him out there.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Right.
Yeah. So, and also, if you just go to YouTube and type my name in Tory Starbuck, like Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica, you'll see, just videos spanning back from the 80s up to now, and like some of the new stuff that we've done. The Tory Starbuck project recorded about 6 videos at Shock City Studios. They recorded us as recording an album, and they recorded it. And
all right. Well, we appreciate it.
Really
take care of yourself. Enjoy your holidays, all that good stuff. Really, and nice. We'll talk to you again soon.
That probably got put up, I think, in October or November. So you'll see videos like that, too. Yeah.